Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another Sundance Books and Music live stream. This afternoon, we're pleased to welcome Curtis Vickers, whose brand new novel, This Here Is Devil's Work, is available in the store now. Today's presentation is made possible in partnership with Nevada Humanities and the Nightingale Family Foundation. Curtis Bradley Vickers received his MFA from Ohio State University before heading back to the West, where he was born and raised. From the first wildfire he experienced as a child fishing on the Mogollon, I hope I pronounced that right, on the Mogollon Rim to his first time, the Bonneville Salt Flats cracked beneath his feet, he has always wanted to pin to the page the West that filled his imagination. A winner of the Nevada Press Association's Best Explanatory Journalism Award for his work on Nevada Silver and Blue, his short fiction and essays have been published by Sou'wester, Ohioana Quarterly, Shroud, Muscle and Blood, and GWS Press. This Here Is Devil's Work is his debut novel. If you have any questions during the live stream, go ahead and drop them into the YouTube comments, and we will get to them as many as we can if there's time at the end. Please join me in welcoming Curtis Vickers.
Thank you, Emily, for that very nice introduction. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. While I wish that I could see you in person, there are some benefits to the fact that this event is virtual. I have friends and family all over the country, and I know right now my grandparents are down in Arizona watching. Having said that, I do have some young cousins, and they might be watching, and maybe they shouldn't be, because there's going to be some profanity in this little bit of graphic material during this reading. So maybe come back to it in a couple years. Thank you to Sundance for hosting this event. Thank you to the University of Nevada Press for publishing books like mine about the West. Thank you to the University of Nevada Reno community, especially my longtime mentor and friend, Christopher Koch. And thank you to the Ohio State University Creative Writing Program, Michelle Herman, Kathy Fagan, Aaron McGraw, Lee Martin, and the late Lee K. Abbott. So a little bit about the book. As Emily mentioned, I was born and raised in the West, where we're under constant threat of wildfire. And I didn't understand how unusual that was until I moved to Ohio and the summers came and nothing burned. While I was there, I read a news article about a wildfire that was happening in Arizona at the time. And there was attached to it a little photo of a wildland firefighter getting ready to go fight that forest fire, not with water, but with a chainsaw. And I knew I had to know more about the tools and techniques we use to fight wildfire. I knew I had to know more about the people who put their lives on the line in order to face this primal force. So I started doing some research about those things. And what I discovered pretty early on is that there is a central unresolved question, a philosophical question with respect to wildfire. And that is, should we fight wildfires at all? Or are we doing more harm than good when we do? Should we let them run their course as nature intended? Now that question is for other people to decide, but it did get me to thinking, what does it make for us to be, or what does it mean for us to be good stewards of our unique landscape? And by extension, what does it mean for us to take care of others, those that we love? When does our intervention in the lives of the ones we love help? And when does it do harm? And that question is at the heart of This Here Is Devil's Work. The novel is broken up into two sections. One called Hot Shots follows two brothers, Morgan and Jeremy. Morgan is a 12-year veteran of the fire line, and his younger brother, Jeremy, is about to embark on his first fire season. This section is called Hot Shots because there are many different kinds of wildland firefighters. You're probably familiar with smoke jumpers who parachute into remote parts of the forest to fight fires. Hot Shots hike into those same remote parts of the wilderness to fight fires. And when they get there, they use tools that are only slightly more sophisticated than the hand tools that we use to garden to fight those fires. The second half of the novel is called Rustlers, and it follows a young grandmother named Jacqueline as she tries to protect her grandson from what she believes is an abusive father. So I'm going to read from both of these sections to give you a taste of the novel, and then I'll take any questions that you have afterwards. So This Here Is Devil's Work, Part 1, Hunt. I'm going to start with the Hot Shots section. I'm going to jump in a few pages in. All that you really need to know from those first few pages is that Morgan and Jeremy have gone on a rabbit hunt, and Jeremy got a little bit squeamish when it was time to seal the deal. "You want to get Morgan, sweetie?" Cassie said to the boy who stood near her, adding seasoning to the rabbit stew. Morgan had been relaxing in a wingback chair, the sounds of supper soothing him nearly to sleep. He yawned and stretched his arms over his head, pulled his socked feet off the iron belly of the pellet stove. "Smells good," he said. He came into the kitchen and put his arm around Cassie's waist. "I said it smells good." Morgan pinched Cassie's side, just above the hip of her jeans. She slapped at his wrist, so he pinched her butt. "Stop it. You love it," he said. Yeah. But she did, and every once in a while, for a moment, things were good enough between them. Good like their first night together 4 years ago, when his muscles were still swollen from a long season swinging the Pulaski and pulling trunks of willows from dried riverbeds. Her tilting her head back, her putting her hand on his thigh, laughing at the sheer pleasure of watching Morgan peel the 20s off the gangster's roll he always had in September in those days. "That all you got?" she said, and slid her body closer to his, her denim shorts bunching up on the north side of her thigh. Remembering that tight body, he said, "More there to pinch than there used to be. Watch it." He grabbed her at the chin and tilted her head up, kissed her, tasted the Irish rose she drank in the summers and in the days leading up to them. After he let go of her, Morgan winked at Jeremy. The boy blushed. Cassie dished up bowls of stew for the three of them, then pulled out her pack of Salems and lit up, watched her family. The boy ate with the kind of vigor you only feel after a long, satisfying day of work. After the hunt, he'd spent the evening working on one of Mike's Camaros, coming home sweaty, streaks of grease up to his elbows. "Mike told me to tell you, you ever want to sell your El Camino, he's all over it." Mike was a sore spot with Morgan. The man owned the R-Stop garage and convenience store, and he'd done well enough by the boy, teaching him how to wrench when Jeremy showed not only an inclination, but a damn fine skill at it, like Dad. But he'd refused to give him paid status, on the basis that the boy needed to be ASE certified before he could justify that move. And in that way, Mike was a sore spot for Cassie, too, because for the boy, ASE certified meant either working full-time, officially, for Mike for a good long while, or going to mechanic school. And mechanic school was how the urgency for the boy to earn money had come about in the first place, the whole reason he was going to join the Hot Shots the very next day. 1 season on the fire line, quick, big bucks. With some help from Morgan, it'd be enough to put him through mechanic school. "Get him through school," Mike had said and clapped Morgan's shoulder, "and I'll take him on. He's a good kid," but not a minute sooner. Morgan said, "Motherfucker's been after my Elko since Dad gave it to me. Said he'd give you a fair price. Make you work for nothing, then act like he's going to treat me fair? Fuck him." "He's just passing along a message," Cassie said. "This is exactly why he should be in the Hot Shots, by the way. 12 years and they've never once screwed me on a check. Time and a half, double time pay, Morgan. Overtime pay, hazard pay, never no pay. Goddamn. I don't want to talk about this." Morgan spooned a piece of rabbit to his mouth. "I'm just saying." "I heard what you're just saying. You've been saying it and saying it." She stubbed her cigarette out and grabbed her spoon. "I'm just saying Mike is no boss. Barnes, he's a damn good..." Cassie closed her eyes, shook her head. "But Barnes isn't his boss, is he?" After 20 years on the line, Barnes's body had finally given in. Hard to believe the same big, burly man who'd recruited a room full of high school students 12 years before, Morgan included, had finally broken down. But he had. The second half of his last fire season hadn't been the same, and it was only well into winter that Morgan had learned the cause of the shift. Last July, Barnes had had a stroke. Took a weekend off and then was back on the line. But he was never the same again. Never again the man who'd stood in front of that room full of high school students and demanded their attention, demanded they listen if they want to know what it means to be a man, not one of these pussies these schools turn out. Morgan was hooked then by the bravado of the man, and over the years he'd learned Barnes never blustered, only talked the truth backed up by a hard life on the line. Around the time Bailey showed up and started looking at him with the same admiration he'd looked at Barnes, he knew he'd chosen wisely in living the life of a hotshot. All brass, no brash. "Won't be any diff," Cassie turned away to Jeremy. She said, "How is it?" "Good, real good. And damn it all, spicy enough?" "Oh my gosh, yes." Morgan stared at Cassie, but she wouldn't return his gaze. "Doesn't understand the first thing about what makes a man. Would keep you a boy," she had it her way. "Put a diaper on you, coo at you until you threw up on her shoulder, shit yourself." "Oh, I understand," she said. "I understand completely. You're fixing to take my beautiful boy up there and bring him back looking like Chisholm." "Who's Chisholm?" Jeremy said. Morgan chewed a piece of thigh meat. "Go ahead, tell him. Tell him what he can look forward to." Chisholm had been a rookie years back, a flake at fire guard school, no doubt. Yet he'd been called up to fight a burn in Colorado with his shitty-ass crew out of California. With the fire a ways off and the rest of the crew still punching their own line, Chisholm and the boys and his squad took their packs off, broke out the bologna and American cheese sandwiches the grub truck had given them that morning, and sat down for 5 on the line they just scratched. While they ate and cracked jokes, the fire crept closer, slow and quiet, until, at last, conditions were just right, and the thing blew up, leaped out toward the 3 firefighters. Chisholm's drip torch, used to light back burns, flash heated in the resulting fire whirl, exploded and sprayed the squad with flaming diesel. Chisholm got the worst of it. The skin that had given character and shape to his face slipped off into his hands like butter off warm pancakes. "That really happened?" Jeremy said. Morgan shrugged. It had happened, but Cassie didn't have to bring it up right now. It's good to scare a recruit, but you don't teach him to be fearful. You teach him to overcome that fear by showing him you have. "You don't have to go, you know," Cassie said, and touched Jeremy's forearm. "No one can make you." "He wants to go," Morgan said. "Chisholm's not going to happen to him. He knows that. You should have seen the way he smoked that rabbit out there." "What's that got to do with anything?" "Means he's aware, means he's sharp, means he's smart, like you always say, and he's going to keep his head on him. Means he's got brass, and your boogeyman story is not going to scare him off. Means he's going to kick ass in fire guard school, and he'll stay right with the Ruby Mountain Hotshots, the best goddamn crew this side of the Lolos." Morgan paused. "What happened to Chisholm's not going to happen to him. He's too smart for it. And besides, I'll be right there." "That really happened?" Jeremy said. "Hey, don't worry, kid. You're a pup, but you're twice the man that pretty boy Chisholm was," Morgan said. "Besides, I'll keep you in my hip pocket if I have to." Cassie smiled. "Thought your hip pocket was already full come summertime." She shrugged. "Seems that way to me," she said. "Sometimes it seems full even on into November. I came home, didn't I? And I've been right here ever since, except when you head back out each and every summer. And when you came home, you weren't alone, were you?" "I go back for the money." "Yeah, for the money. But it's not just for the money, is it? Fuck, listen. The last time I talked to her, she was about this fucking close to dragging that man of hers down to Vegas, putting the ring on his finger, how hard up she is to marry him." It wasn't long after the November hunt that Bailey had taken to a boy at her university, and the next thing Morgan knew, the two had shacked up. Cassie walked over to the answering machine by the refrigerator. "That so?" "That's the straight shit," he said, gripping his spoon tight. She pushed the play button on the recording machine, and as it clicked on, she reached above the fridge and pulled down the bottle of Irish Rose. "Morgie, it's me. Listen, I'm coming through Windover this afternoon. I thought maybe you'd want to meet up. Maybe get some lunch, talk about the crew. Maybe introduce me to your brother. Why aren't you answering your phone? Come on, man. Anyway, I'll give you a buzz later. We got a lot of catching up to do. Haven't talked in forever. Anyway, back to single life for me. Haha, I'll tell you all about it. Talk to you then, big guy." Cassie let the machine click and say, "End of messages," and let another second or two draw out before she said, "You want something to drink while I'm up, big guy?" Morgan felt his ears burn. He buried his spoon deep into his bowl of stew and turned over discs of sliced carrot. He said, "Calls everyone that." "I bet she does, Morgie." Cassie poured herself a glass of the Irish Rose and drank it, leaning against the edge of the sink. "Who is that?" Jeremy said. "That," Cassie said, "is your boss. That's the woman going to lead you out to fight those fires that tear up men's faces, barely older than you." Morgan pinned a piece of rabbit to the bottom of his bowl and shredded it with the blunt edge of his spoon. It was true. Bailey had jumped Morgan for the position, and with her university degree and paper qualification, and although that had had its own sting, at the moment he wasn't worried about it. He wasn't even thinking about it. He kept rolling her words over in his mouth, back to the single life for me. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. What you get in the rest of that chapter on Hot Shots is a little bit more on the background of Jeremy and Morgan, how it is that Jeremy came to live with Morgan. And you get to know a little bit about their father, who has been absent from town for 6-7 years. That man is named Lenny. I'm going to jump ahead to a section from the Rustlers portion of the novel. And I think all that you need to know about this is that Jacqueline, our young grandmother, is about to go on a date for the first time in some time. And that the person she is going to go on a date with is a stranger who's been knocking around town for a couple of months. Lenny took Jacqueline to Bronx, about the only restaurant in town. She said her hellos, and when people asked, she introduced Lenny, calling him Jerome's latest and greatest Don Juan. Well, oldest, anyway, he said. And when they'd finally sat down and ordered their meals, burger for Jacqueline and a bowl of spaghetti for Lenny, from Marla, Shirtless Jones's main squeeze, she said, so I gotta ask, how old are you anyway? If you gotta ask, then you gotta answer, too. What is this? I'll show you mine if you show me yours. We can play that game, too, you want? Well, however old you are, it's a goddamn miracle you made it that long without getting your head knocked off, as direct as you are with your comments. Direct's just another form of honest. I give you the straight shit. I suppose, Jacqueline said. But then you get a person wondering, you've been here, what, 2-3 months? And from the looks of it, your scrawny ass ain't a day less than 65? Jacqueline smiled and waited. You may proceed. All right. You barely said but 2 words that didn't have to do with your sobriety. And that seems to be the biggest accomplishment of your life. But I'd say 35, 40 years ago, and another 20, 30 pounds in your biceps and through your chest, you probably made a handsome man. Which makes me think you have a kid or two you ain't talking about. A wife, an ex-wife, something along those lines. And that makes me wonder what you're doing in a town like Jerome, Montana. I ain't quite 65, but you're right. I've been out with enough ladies in my time to know when they line up a set of questions like these, I haven't asked a single question. Yes, you have. Every one of them observations had a hidden question mark at the end of it. Jacqueline took a drag of her American spirit. Anyway, I've been around the block enough times to know the questions a woman asks tells me a lot about that woman, much more than any answers she'd give to the questions I might dream up. Marla set down the bowl of spaghetti in front of Lenny as he finished talking, and the burger for Jacqueline, too. How's everything looking? Marla said and pulled a bottle of ketchup out of her apron. Looks fine, Jacqueline said. Delicious, sweetheart. If you need anything else, just holler. Marla started walking away, but Jacqueline called her back. Marla, you still running around with Jonesy? Ugh, yes. How you stand it? Same way with any man. Close your eyes and tell yourself it'll all be over soon. Lenny laughed and slapped the table. So that's what it is. Jacqueline smiled. What I'm talking about is you got yourself a good enough guy, but he's sure got a mouth on him. Thinks he knows what's best for everyone. He tell you to give up milk and peanut butter and jelly? I keep telling him nobody's looking for advice from an old hippie like him. But does that stop him? No, sir. That's what I mean. Thinks he's got the cure for what's ailing everybody. Thinks he knows their needs and wants inside out. What do you say to him to get him to know that when it comes to the ways of a woman, when it comes to your ways, he's got a lot of learning to do? I just nod along and say, oh yes, that's right. Try to tell him any different from what he's got in mind. It'll be an all-night argument. Jacqueline took a long look at Lenny. Thank you, Marla. Food looks great. Lenny put his closed fist to his chest and wiggled the imaginary knife Jacqueline had stuck in. He said, point taken, and went to town on his spaghetti, leaving Jacqueline to wonder a question she dared not ask, having to do with his obvious dentures. How'd he do it with those shiny fake grinners of his? She only smiled and declined to answer when he asked what was so funny. They were nearly halfway done with their dinner. So how about you? You got any kids? Asked Lenny. One daughter, one grandson, Jacqueline said. Shit, that boy with the paintball gun, he isn't your grandson, is he? She'd mentioned Bandy that afternoon when he'd gone running by the Suds and pub, barefoot and shirtless, screaming. blasting the sides of buildings and the cars as he ran by. When she cussed, Lenny just said, "Fuck, he's just a boy. Leave him be. He'll get over it on his own. More pissed off you get, the more goddamn interesting you make the whole thing." No, thank God. Good, because I recall you saying something about the mother being, well, not exactly being Montana Mother of the Year. A fucking drugged out loser, low-life trailer trash is probably what I said. Fucking A, that's a award-winning mouth, Lenny laughed. And don't get me wrong here, but don't you live in a trailer too? The difference between living in a trailer and being trailer trash. Jesus Christ. Take Joe, she said. Though even as she started talking, she wasn't sure if she was willing to tell the role Joe played in her and her daughter's lives. She took a bite of her hamburger and dipped a pair of fries in a glob of ketchup while she chewed. All right, who's Joe? Jacqueline swallowed, looked down at her plate. Daryl, my grandson, his daddy. Let me take a stab at it and say Joe falls into the second category. How about you tell me about your kids for a while? 2 boys, Lenny said. No grandkids, last I heard. Last you heard? That's right. Maybe I should ask it different. When was the last you heard? 6 years, he said. One's full grown, the other will be 18 any day now. I see, Jacqueline said. Lenny put his fork down and stared at his spaghetti like it contained the answers to the questions he'd been asking for so long. Daryl's about 6, Jacqueline said, sensing the man drifting away from her. Lives in Tucson. With Joe, Lenny said. With Joe. Lenny took a deep breath. Hey, listen, I got an idea. Before we derail this date of ours, why don't we back up the track, throw the switch, and head down a different track? Date? You got another word for it? Let's see how we do on that different track. Then we can talk correct verbiage. Right now, it's feeling awfully like a confession booth. Say 10 Hail Marys, sweetheart, and we'll be forgiven our crime of dragging down a perfectly nice evening. Lenny squeezed Jacqueline's forearm. You know, I was a priest for a while, Lenny said. Figures, the way you've been watching Amy. I could see you got a taste for the youngins. I've only been watching you from day one. Don't buy it, Jacqueline said. And as Lenny objected, she continued. Still, compared to your tired old ass, I'm a spring chicken. Okay, Grandma. So I'm going to skip ahead. We'll stick with the Rustlers. In the intervening pages, Jacqueline's need for money and her desire to protect her grandson has increased, but she has a plan. Jacqueline parked her daddy's horse hauler on the edge of the Moriarty ranch. The trailer wasn't much after all these years. It was rusted. It was smaller than she remembered. The tires had hardened and the gates screamed bloody murder when you swung them open. But it'd do. It'd have to do. The lights of the main house on the far side of the valley were still on. John and Eddie, Moriarty's sons, probably sitting at the kitchen table, congratulating themselves on their windfall, cracking open their daddy's best bottle of whiskey. Their pregnant heifers, marked neon pink, orange, and blue, rested in the barn halfway between the International and the house. I can't believe we're doing this, Lenny said. You want out, now's the time. No, Lenny said. Just haven't done anything like this since I was, 16. And then it was just stealing a case of liquor from the gas station. He laughed. But I'm in, for sure, for you. Just tell me what to do. We wait for those lights to go out, she said, and pointed to the main house lights. Then you watch what a cowboy's daughter can do. Lenny lifted her right hand off the gear shift and brought it to his lips. Sweetheart, I've been with a lot of women over the years, a lot of strange women, but you take the cake. I never even heard of someone hatch a plan like this. You don't think there's some record of them heifers somewhere? Of them, probably, she said. But they're young? Doubt it. And those boys may be smart in other ways, but they're cowboy enough, just enough to squat up with their spurs on. They won't know the difference. That's the long and the short of it, isn't it? Hoping they're as fool as you say they are. On the way back from Brighton yesterday, having given Tiff all the money she'd been able to save since Dad had passed, money aimed at getting the boot off that Jones had put on Daddy's trailer years ago, Jacqueline had planned out all the details. It'd work. She was sure of it. The only trouble was she'd need Lenny on board, at least his truck. And the idea of saying her plan aloud and straight nearly scared the idea right out of her. Well, what we're going to do is run up to Moriarty's, swipe his pregnant heifers using her daddy's old rusted horse hauler after it had sat 30 years, then stash those beasts until they pop out their calves. We'll sell their young for a tidy profit. Moriarty won't mind. His corpse is still chilling in the ground, God rest him. And then I'll run on down to Tucson. Lenny didn't seem to know thing one about cows, though, so he wouldn't know anything about their theft. He'd think it was something that only happened in the movies. Yet every year, if you knew the right folks, they'd chew your ear off about how this ranch or that ranch lost 2,000 head overnight, gone just like that. They'd shake their heads and wonder at the planning and the balls it'd take to pull off such a heist. All right, so we're going to leave the Rustlers. I'm going to come back to the hot shots for one more section. We're going to pick up where Morgan and Jeremy show up for the fire season. I'll just read a couple of pages, then we'll take your questions. The veterans had the whole week to saunter in, but the rest of the recruits started rolling in around 11:30, saying goodbye to their mothers, their fathers, their girlfriends, and their buddies who had dropped them off at the base. Morgan hung a step back from Bailey while she, dressed in Nomex pants and a Ruby Mountain t-shirt with the crew's logo, a Pulaski and shovel crossed like an X, nodded to each new recruit, smiled, and welcomed them, offering them their training manuals and the keys to their cabins. They shook her hand, but even as they did, they looked beyond her to him, building in him a new sense of responsibility. Long had he been the most veteran of the rank and file, but never had he had to worry about the safety of anyone but himself. That's what being a squad boss means, looking out for others. One of those Morgans was meant to train up and protect, smiled at him and revealed a set of braces. Morgan saw now what Cassie had seen at her dinner table the night before, such youth. Some of them would go soon enough and be someone else's problem, but at that moment, as they spoke with each other, he thought he was looking at a group of kindergartners. So pale were they, so weak were they. Jeremy got right in there with the other recruits and started telling jokes. Afterward, he gave one guy a punch on the shoulder. The kid, a little taller, a little thicker through the chest than Jeremy, laughed. Morgan hoped Bailey saw this and marked it in Jeremy's favor. Plays well with others. In all, they had 7 recruits, more than any year before. Even though Fire Guard School was in no way representative of the hard work the crew would do over the summer, each summer, 2, 3, 4 boys would leave, and the rest would be sent to the crews with the greatest need. The Ruby Mountains were on that list, and Morgan could tell already that the spot on his crew would come down to Jeremy or this other taller kid. After 12 years, he could identify the winners with ease. Yet Morgan was of two minds about who washed out and why. On the one hand, by necessity, a good wildland firefighter has to be smart, in the way of the land, like a good country boy. But it was the greatest sign of wisdom to understand just how overmatched a crew is when a sleeping fire wakes up, shrugs off the crowns of 150-foot lodgepole pines like they were nothing, and starts marching, roaring up and down the mountains. The flip side of that coin was that the only men who stayed on to fight the fires saw that danger, accepted it, and suited up in the brown and yellow Nomex anyway. Morgan didn't know where a soul ought to come down on the issue. In favor of the smarts to stay out of danger, or in favor of the dumbass bravery it took to stare that danger down. Barnes, on the 4th day of Fire Guard School, always addressed this very question with his wildland firefighter recruits. This is a dumb man's business. No one really expects an intelligent 18-year-old boy to say, "See that mountain over there, burning away and not really bothering anyone? See that fire miles and miles away from civilization? I'm going to go stomp it out. Water? Nah, don't need it. Just the sweat of my brow. Just these right here." Barnes always said this and slapped his own rock-solid biceps, adding, "and this right here," and pounded his chest. It's a brave man's business, yes, but I tell you what, we might have a good record against these fires, but one defeat is about all you'll get. Barnes always went on to dissect a half-dozen example fires that had gone wrong. He'd diagram reenactments of those they didn't have file footage of, but he was always certain to show the videos too of the men who had been entrapped, of those who had forgotten to roll their yellow fire-resistant shirt sleeves down to their wrists and had lost the skin on their forearms when the flames whipped by. Showed them baring those arms to the camera, fists clenched, blowing a bubble of big league chew. Those were the men who had made it, but there were others. He played audio that had been recorded when a man was caught in his shake and bake during a burnover. He always started the tape, then stopped just when the screaming began. These things, these shake and bakes, Barnes said, aren't really meant to protect you when a fire comes right over you. It's got these 2 layers, and the glue that holds those layers together, it melts at around 350 degrees. Around 600, that aluminum shell on the outside starts to disintegrate, and by about 700 degrees, all that's left is the layer of fiberglass. Know them Pyrex pans your mama cooks meatloaf in? That's about what we're talking here. The shake and bakes your Pyrex. You can figure which part's the meat. Those fires, they get well up into the thousands of degrees. Think about that next time your mama preheats her oven to 375. He always hit play again, the screaming coming back like the finale of a slasher film. You hear that rustling? Barnes said over the cries. That's the shake and bake. You hear that sound, you know it's still intact. So we're talking maybe 400 degrees tops. Fire is still a good ways away. A solid 2 minutes of writhing, screaming, calling out for mercy, for water, for rescue. Just before the man's walkie-talkie finally gives out, melted next to his charred body, you hear him call out for his mother. Then his cries fade back into the primal, unintelligible sort of animals in the last throes of euphoria. The kind you hear when a fox caught in the iron teeth of a bear trap determines it's necessary to gnaw its foot off to escape. Don't underestimate how likely it is you'll lose your head in a situation like that. Think mom's there to fix it, Barnes always said when the tape squealed to its conclusion. And that guy, by comparison, still stayed relatively sane, considering the situation. When you're in that shake and bake, you start thinking crazy things. Gets hot in there. Oxygen heats up, disappears real fast. Your brain tries to convince you you're just under the bed covers back home, and that the only reason it's hard to breathe is because you're trying to breathe through your Spider-Man blanket. Brain convinces you you got to throw this shelter off your back and make a dash for it, that there's better air for you out there. At least that mama's boy knew to keep his butt in his shake and bake. Your chances aren't good under it, but if you need to deploy, if I call out to you to tell you to deploy, then you deploy and you keep your ass in there until I say so. Don't do like this guy. Then Barnes would show another video, another man, an 8-year vet, skin looking like lava, hardened but still glowing, a man who had made a mistake and now his wife's wiping his ass for him. Boys, this is serious business. Want you to spend the rest of the afternoon thinking about it. Ask yourself what you've got in this world that you love. Anyone in this world who you love. And if someone's waiting for you to come home in one piece in September, if you've got anything at all that you hope to do in this world still, then come see me by midnight tonight, and I'll personally drive you back down to the bus depot in Elko, to your girlie's house, to wherever you need to go. I'll personally deliver you back to Jesus, and I'll shake your hand, tell you you're a good man, a smart man, a man who will do something great in this world. No hard feelings. But this here is devil's work, and I can't guarantee you I won't lose a soul up here this summer. I've done enough to hurt my chances with God. Don't put the burden of scorching one of his angels on my cross. And I'll stop there. So thank you.
Wow, that was great. Affecting.
Thanks.
So we do have a few questions here if you're ready to open it up.
Well, let's give it a shot.
So first question from someone named CJ Koch, not sure who that is, says, Curtis, this book's been through a lot on the way to being in the world. How has the story changed since you first wrote it? Have you cut anything out that you missed or that you miss?
Yeah, Chris, this is Chris Koch, I imagine, CJ Koch. Thank you. Thanks for coming out, Chris. Yeah, so the first draft of this novel was written in 2011 as I was finishing up my MFA at Ohio State University, and it was 940 pages long.
Wow.
So the second draft was 660 pages long. This book is 312 pages long, something like that. So 2/3 of it is gone. And There are moments that I spent a lot of time working, putting the characters through different kinds of fires and different situations that I had read about and seen, and that I found dramatically interesting. And so I miss all of those. But I found that the more that I revised, the more that I streamlined, the more that I figured out, well, what is at the heart of this story, the better that it got. So yeah, there are individual scenes or characters who have been cut. There are plot lines, subplots that have been lost over the years. But I think this distillation is probably the best form.
Well, and along kind of the same lines, Ben Rodgers, who first, he had a good comment that just said, "This here is Curtis's work," and we all enjoyed that. But he says, I remember reading this story in an earlier form as a screenplay. Maybe can you talk about how you approached adapting this in the direction film to novel?
Oh, that's a great question. So the screenplay was here, the novel was here, and I tried to figure out what is the best dialogue, what is the best plot point that I can put from here into there. So again, to talk about the different forms that the story has taken. So yeah, the first draft was 940 pages. I did write a screenplay version of this, and typical screenplays are about 110 pages with a lot of margins. So you have to cut a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of, how can I convey the same meaning, but trim down how many people there are in the screenplay, or trim down the number of scenes. So yeah, it was a lot of killing your darlings.
Right. Wow. And then Elisa Surgis asks, and this is a question I had too. What kind of research did you do? Did you work with fire jumpers or anyone working in fire?
No, I was completely isolated from the community at the time. So one of the things I would like to do at some point is work more directly with wildland firefighters and get their stories from their perspective. So it was a lot of distance research. I was still in school when I wrote this, so I didn't have any money to go anywhere. So it was a lot of reading, a lot of watching videos, a lot of following the wildland firefighter crews on their websites, a lot of reading incident reports, which are kind of fascinating documents that describe how the fires have progressed, how many acres have burned, what tactics were used to fight the fire. So it was all from a distance. And so that is the next big thing for me, is how can I go out there and like work with wildland firefighters and see it from their perspective?
Yeah. And did it change how you kind of experienced watching the fires of the past year, or even a few years ago, excuse me, a few years ago when the Ruby Mountains themselves were unfortunately on fire?
Yeah, so when I was young, I was 9 when I experienced that fire that you mentioned on the Mogollon Rim. It was called the Dude Fire. And it carved up a huge section of the Mogollon Rim. It burned the Zane Grey cabin that was up there, and 6 people lost their lives. And I watched it, I was a kid, so I had limited understanding of what was happening. And I don't even remember that 6 people lost their lives. That's something that I figured out later on, and have had to think about and deal with this idea of these people are willing to do this very heroic thing and are willing to die if they have to for it. Obviously, we don't want that. And then we've got all kinds of protections in place. And yet, what was it, 2013, the Yarnell Fire took 19 lives in Arizona. So yeah, you have a greater appreciation for how difficult it is and how truly skilled everyone involved in fighting these fires are, and just how brave. They really do. They go out there with these like what look like hose and pickaxes, and they go and clear to secure us, to save us, to secure our unique landscape. So
Yeah.
much greater appreciation than I had before.
Yeah, absolutely. Can imagine. All right, so we have a question here from Jay Copley 27. They say, it seems like physical strength is a main theme running through the passages you've read. Do we see this strength fail at any point in the book?
People get themselves into some awful situations. There would be no drama if they continue to succeed.
Right. And we have another question here from Catherine Sawicki, I think is the last name. I love how the dialogue sets the background as the conversation goes on between your characters. Are there inspirations that you take from? What do you recommend to make authentic character dialogue?
Oh, just listen to people. And Katie, it's nice to hear from you. I hope you're doing well. Yeah, just listen, pay attention to the way that people repeat themselves, or the phrases that they come back to, and pay attention to how those change over time. It's really, I mean, I'm an introvert by nature, and I like to be on the edge of conversation and just observe. So that's what I would say, is just pay as much attention as you can, and be aware of what you're hearing.
Mhm. All right. Oliver Brady asks, having researched this topic so thoroughly, do you find your anger at the people who are irresponsible and cause fires has increased?
I don't know that it's increased. I think it's always been pretty high. One of the things that I mean, you hear about people who intentionally start these fires occasionally. That makes me angry. You know, everything is so precarious. We get so dry in the summer, and to willfully do it is just, it's insane. So yeah, my appreciation for the landscape of the West is pretty high. So anything that threatens it, it bothers me. But yes, in that particular way, yeah, it has increased.
Yeah. Target shooting in the summers. And, yeah. All right. So do you have any advice for people who want to write, but they also have a career and a family and friends and a life?
Well, this is something that I think everyone who isn't Stephen King or John Grisham struggles with. Is, you know, Ben Rodgers, who asked a question earlier, he's managed to write some great novels while pursuing a very important and demanding career. I don't know. It's a daily challenge. You know, how do you find the time? Can you carve out a half an hour during lunch? Can you wake up a half an hour early? Can you stay up a half an hour late? Is that enough time for you? The manuscript that I most recently wrote, actually, though, I had about 5 days off from work, and I said, okay, this is all that I'm going to do. I'm going to do this from 8 a.m. until 6 p.m. And I did. And, you know, I was able to do a manuscript from word one to the last word in that time, because I don't have the regular, like, pockets of time that you have when you're a student or going to grad school or whatever. So it's just persistence and figuring out what will work for you.
Yeah, everyone's different.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Andrew Palmer asks, what's your next novel about?
Oh, that's a great question. So as most writers do, I've got some things in the can that I'm tinkering with. After I wrote This Here Is Devil's Work, I started researching the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, which I found to be incredibly fascinating. David McCullough has a great book on it. And one of the things that he talked about in there was these structures, and I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, but I think they're called caissons. They're big wooden structures that they had to build and sink to the bottom of the river in order to set the foundation for the bridge itself. So these big structures went down to the bottom of the river. Workers went down into those structures to dig out the dirt all day long, so that they could get low enough so that they could set the foundation or the piling correctly. So I wrote a novel about that combined that with there's this really great pamphlet from 1895. It's called, oh gosh, I'm going to get the title wrong. The Life and Times of a Professional Rat Catcher. And it detailed the life of a rat catcher in London, and the way that they did their work at the time. So we combined those two stories, and there's a novel that came out of that. I'm also working on and revising the one that I did most recently, is about, so Nikola Tesla developed this Tesla coil in 1898. The idea of it was that we'd be able to wirelessly transmit electricity all over the globe. It didn't work. But but the novel idea that I have is to imagine if it did work, but not in the way that he expected. So I'm working on that one too, and hopefully that'll be done and polished soon enough.
Yeah, well, they both sound really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then just as kind of a wrap up, since we're a bookstore, I like to ask our authors, have you read anything great lately? Have you just not had time because you've been so busy writing, or is there anything you'd like to recommend?
Well, two people that were on this call today, Ben Rodgers has a book, The Heavy Side, that came out last summer, which was fantastic. Christopher Cokes, You Would Have Told Me Not To, is an incredible collection of short stories. He has a story, I was thinking about it while I was reading this, called Big Guy, which is an amazing exploration of what it means to think that you can solve all of your problems by losing the extra pounds that you carry around, and then to discover, you still have to look at yourself in the mirror. Gabe Urza's book, The White Death in Illusion, novella came out a couple of years ago. It's fantastic. Let's see, yeah. So those are the three that come to mind.
Yeah, those are great. And then while you're answering that, we actually got a few more questions. So
okay.
Just a few more. Chris asks, your MA thesis is a really great book. Is it still something you can go back and read? Would you ever revisit it?
So Chris was my MA thesis advisor, and I wrote an MA. My thesis when I was working on that degree was called Salt Flats, set in Wendover, Utah, about a couple of brothers trying to figure out how to navigate. It was a coming of age novel. Yeah, I'd love to revisit it. I've learned a lot since then, Chris. That was almost 15 years ago that I was working on that. Yeah, I'll look at it like this someday.
All right, and then someone from Light Touch Laser Dental says, hi, Curtis. Which character from your book can you most personally relate to?
Oh, that's a great question. Hi, Kent. I personally relate to, I think the thing that I fear is that there's a little bit of Morgan in me. I think the thing that I hope is that there's a little bit of Jeremy in me. But I will say that Jacqueline is the character who is most based on a real person, someone that I care about deeply. So there's a soft spot in my heart for her.
Well, that's great. And thank you, Curtis. Thank you so much for being here today and for reading from your book. Again, this year's Devil's Work is available at the store right now. You can get it. You can order it online. Is there anything else you'd like to say, Curtis?
No, just thank you. I really appreciate this. And thank you to everyone who came out. It's so humbling, and I'm so grateful.
Yes, thank you. All right, everyone. Thanks very much.